34 minutes after the hour, USA Radio Daily. I'm your host, Gary Nolan, your equal opportunity annoyer. Many years ago, back in the 70s and 80s, there was a joke. It was, you know, you're going to have a bad day when, and it would say the 60 Minutes news team is in your office. I would argue today, you know, you're going to have a bad day when Kenneth Ralston says he's going to sue you. Because apparently he's done it very successfully against, of all places, Google. He just won for the state of Arizona $85 million. Who can I sue? Kenneth, I want you to sue somebody for me. How are you?
I'm good, Gary. How are you doing?
Not doing as well as good as you, I tell you. I don't know what your share of that was, but I bet it was pretty. You went to war with Google. You can't think of a corporation that has a lot more resources, and you beat them. Tell me about this lawsuit in Arizona, and by the way, what are the implications for anybody around the country that's listening?
Sure thing, Gary. So in this lawsuit, the state of Arizona, and this was brought by Mark Brnovich, the Attorney General, the state of Arizona, we alleged that Google deceptively and unfairly collected and used user location data to serve geo-targeted advertisements on Arizona consumers. So more specifically, we alleged that in a variety of ways, Google collected user location data from Arizona users without properly informing them of this collection. Google then used this information to serve users with geo-targeted advertisements.
So maybe I do a Google search on sewing machines, and as I'm driving down the street going past a department store, it says, hey, the department store has a sale on sewing machines. Is that what they were doing?
That's essentially right. It's the use of your location data while you're using and interacting with Google's apps and services. They'll use that location data they collect from you to then serve its users with geo-targeted advertisements.
Does that benefit the consumer?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on what that individual consumer would want. For me personally, I don't really want Google collecting my personal information and using it to serve geo-targeted advertisements on me. So when I first began, when we began this case, I went into my settings and I made sure that I turned off those settings that would track where I'm at.
By the way, for the sake of listeners, could you give a tip? How do you do that? Do you just turn off location settings?
So there's actually a wide variety of location-related settings. There's a couple in particular that this lawsuit was involved with, and beginning with an investigation that led to this lawsuit, there's a few I can mention. There's a location history setting, and that one is a setting that will actually track users everywhere that they're going. And that setting, if you turn that one off, Google won't be tracking your location using that setting in particular. But there's another setting, one that most people don't know about, called Web and App Activity. That setting is a Google account setting. If that account setting is turned on, which it's defaulted to on, it will actually track determine a user's location when that user interacts with Google services each time that user interacts with those services. So if you want Google to not collect your location using that particular setting, the user should probably turn that setting off, and that's Web and App Activity.
So you prevailed. You got them to cough up $85 million. Did the consumers in the state of Arizona all get a share of that? Who got the money?
So in this case, and this is required by Arizona Revised Statute 44-1531.01, the settlement goes to the state general fund, and from there it can be appropriated by the legislature, and it will be used for a variety of things, including education, broadband, and internet privacy efforts and purposes.
Wait a minute. So Google screws me. The state takes them to court, and then the state profits from it. I want my share of that money. I don't think I care if the state gets it. What does that do for people in Missouri? This victory of yours? or Texas?
Well, so this, as we mentioned, this case was an Arizona-based case. This was just about Arizona users, but it will have, I believe, broader implications beyond that. There are 4 other states, which would include Washington, D.C., that have filed very similar lawsuits across the country back in January. And we believe that this case will set a precedent moving forward for those other cases, as Arizona was the first state in the country to file a lawsuit related to Google's location tracking.
Are they appealing or are they paying?
So this is a settlement. When you have a settlement, there is no appeal.
Wow, so that's like an admission of guilt, isn't it?
Well, in the settlement, which is publicly available online, this is very typical for any settlement agreement. Google did not admit to any.
Of course not.
To admit to any conduct.
Of course not. But well, we'll go from there. What about individuals? Can an individual sue and say, "Hey, you're tracking me. I didn't give you permission. I didn't even know you were doing this. Can I sue Google too?"
So that's a great question. An individual can bring a personal consumer fraud action case under the Arizona Consumer Fraud Statute. And I'm not as familiar with other states, but I believe most other states provide for a right of action. In particular, though, the law changes when a lawsuit is brought by a state compared to an individual. There are certain elements an individual needs to prove in a case like this compared to the state. And a case brought by the Attorney General has other benefits, like being able to conduct an investigation, like there was in this case, prior to initiating a lawsuit. So without providing any legal advice over the air here, the law allows for individual claims. However, whether such a claim would be successful is a different question, something that I can't really answer at the moment.
All right, so did the state of Arizona call your law firm and say, listen, we want to sue, and then they got Kenneth Ralston on it, or how did this happen?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So in 2018, the Associated Press published an article called Google Tracks Your Movements, Like It or Not. That article describes how Google uses user location despite users turning off that location history setting I was talking about before. At that time in 2018, Google had a help page describing that setting, and some of the language on there stated that with location history off, the places you go are no longer stored. And despite that article, the author there did a little bit of investigating, and they realized that there's another setting, that web and app activity setting, that also tracks user location when location history is turned off. So the Attorney General, Mark Brnovich, read this article in 2018 and began to investigate Google to figure out if this was the case. And that investigation led to this lawsuit, which was filed in May 2020 and settled this week. In about February 2021, the AG's office contacted our firm and specifically contacted Kevin Neal, who is a senior partner at Gallagher and Kennedy, and asked if he would be willing to step into this case to act as lead counsel for the trial, which was becoming more apparent that this case was going to get very close to trial.
All right. And at the last minute, they said, yeah, we don't want to. If they go to trial and you prove at trial, then they're marked for life, right? I mean, it's right now they can deny that they did anything wrong, and that's what they did in the settlement. But if you beat them in the court, they don't have that option.
So going to trial, it would be up to the jury to decide whether the allegations were proven as true. But in this case, as you're right, we settled the case early. But leading up to this, trial was set to start on October 24th. Leading up to the settlement, Google filed a number of motions called motions in limine to exclude certain evidence and witnesses that we were preparing for trial. And by and large, those motions were denied. And at that point, both parties had all our cards on the table. We knew Google's trial plan, Google knew ours. And then we were able to reach a settlement prior to actually trying the case.
Wow, yeah. One of the professions I've always admired is attorneys. I see you guys thinking on your feet, and I think, man, who could do that? Apparently you can, Kenneth, and you can do it very well, and you have. So you would suggest then for people wanting to protect their privacy, they go looking for those settings.
That's exactly right. If a user wanted to make sure, if a user wanted to restrict what information they were sharing online, they should absolutely go to Google's webpage, to others' web pages for services that they interact with, read those privacy policies, read the settings, and importantly, read the descriptions of the settings that relate to location tracking. And then you can evaluate for yourself whether you want to turn those settings off and on.
Well, I would go into the settings, but you and I both know nobody reads those disclosures. They're 37 pages long, and with some of the tiniest print known to man, in a language that seems completely foreign to most of us. And that's kind of a problem too, isn't it?
Well, so that's something that we're hoping that this case will kind of bring to light. It's that users need to be aware of that there is a large extent of information being tracked and collected online that they might not otherwise be aware of. And we're hopeful that this lawsuit and others around the country will help users become more cognizant of that and educate users about the extent that it's being tracked. And while those documents may be difficult to parse through, having this knowledge generally is going to be very helpful, I think, for average, everyday folks moving forward.
Well, if I had hired you to read every one of those disclosure agreements that I just said I accept, I'd be broker in the Ten Commandments. They're just always so long and so detailed, and so the print is so small. Is that because attorneys, enterprising attorneys are encouraging this litigious mentality that we have? Is it? Are you part of the solution and part of the problem? Not you personally, but your occupation?
Well, I think the tech companies want to protect themselves, and at the same time, attorneys like me want to make sure that users are completely informed about what these companies are doing to collect users' location. So I believe that as a profession, we're trying to make sure that these companies, and by bringing lawsuits such as this one, companies are held accountable to make sure that they tell users the truth. And if that takes a little while to explain how that information is used, that might be what we need to do.
But I mean, when I see these long disclosures and read this and acknowledge, it is because clever attorneys file lawsuits, and it costs a ton of money, and so they're trying to kind of cover their derriere. It really is a challenge to read all that stuff. Anyway, I appreciate your coming on, and I think you must be a damn brilliant attorney, and I wish you the best of luck.
Well, thanks, Gary. And I got to say, it really was a big team effort. At Gallagher and Kennedy, we had Kevin Neal as our lead counsel, and other associates here like Danny Kolomitz, Ashley Fitzgibbons, and Courtney Otten. And along with, we had a co-counsel in Los Angeles, Guy Rutenberg. And really, we were able to come together as a team to really bring this case home.
Well, usually I would say carpe diem, and you did. You seized the day. Kenneth, thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Gary.
All right, glad to have you on the USA Radio Daily. Wow. You sue an organization that size and bring them to their knees, and they say, okay, uncle, we'll give you the money, stop the litigation. You got to have done your homework, and you've got to have had all the goods. These attorneys are just amazing. And when I watch them, and I've been in the courtroom for several cases, a couple of criminal cases that I remember witnessing, and to see how they think on their feet just amazes me. There was an attorney, and this goes back about 100 years ago, Clarence Darrow. If you're not familiar with him, look up the Monkey Trial or the Scopes Trial. and you get some indication of just how incredibly fast they are. I actually saw Henry Fonda, one man play on Clarence Darrow, and it was fascinating. Just fascinating. All right, up against the clock. We got a quick break, and then we're going to come back, me and Jake, on the USA Radio Daily.